Mike hugged his wife goodbye on October 12, 2016. He told her he'd be back in 5 days. He never came back. He was heading into the Rockies with his brother Tom and their childhood friend Derek, 3 experienced hunters on their annual elk hunt. They'd done this trip every fall for 15 years. They knew these mountains, but this time, something was different. This time, they weren't alone in those woods. 7 years later, drone footage found their camp perfectly intact. But hidden in the shadows of the trees, investigators discovered something chilling. Evidence that someone had been systematically watching them from the moment they arrived. And what that observer left behind reveals the terrifying truth about what happened to those 3 hunters. The Colorado Rockies in October paint a picture most people only see in magazines. Golden aspens against evergreen pines, crisp morning air that bites at your lungs, elk bugling echoes across valleys that seem to go on forever. For Mike, Tom, and Derek, this wasn't just a hunting trip. It was tradition. It was brotherhood. It was the 1 week every year when nothing else mattered except the mountains and each other. Mike was the planner, always had been. He'd mapped out their route 3 months in advance, same as every year. They'd hike 12 miles into the backcountry, set up base camp near Willow Creek, and spend 5 days tracking elk through terrain they knew like their own backyards. Tom, his younger brother by 3 years, handled the gear. Derek, who'd been their friend since 3rd grade, was the cook. Nobody made better campfire chili. It was a system that worked. They left the trailhead at dawn. Each man carried a 60-pound pack, GPS units clipped to their belts, satellite phones tucked inside pockets. 15 years of experience on these exact trails. They weren't rookies. They weren't careless. They were 3 men doing what they'd done 100 times before. The first day passed without incident. They reached their usual camping spot by mid-afternoon. A clearing surrounded by thick pine forest, close enough to the creek to hear water running at night. Mike's wife received a satellite text at 6:47 p.m. Made camp. Weather good. Love you. Short and simple. Exactly like Mike. That was the last anyone heard from them. When Mike didn't call on October 17th, his wife knew something was wrong. Mike never missed check-ins. Never. She waited 2 hours, calling his satellite phone 11 times. Each call went straight to a recorded message about being outside service range. At 10:15 a.m., she called the Summit County Sheriff's Office. By noon, search and rescue teams were mobilizing. The dispatcher asked the standard questions. How experienced were they? Very. Did they have proper equipment? Yes. Everything. Could they have changed their route? Unlikely. Mike always stuck to the plan. The answers should have been reassuring. Instead, they made what came next even more disturbing. Search teams reached the trailhead by 2:30 p.m. 12 volunteers, 3 sheriff's deputies, and 2 search dogs. They found Mike's truck exactly where it should be, locked and untouched. The trail showed boot prints heading in, none coming out. At that point, most missing hiker cases involve an injury, a wrong turn, or a sudden weather event. The rescue coordinator, a man named Stevens who'd worked these mountains for 23 years, expected to find them within 24 hours. He was wrong. The first team reached Willow Creek at dusk. They found the campsite, or rather, they found where the campsite should have been. The clearing was empty. No tents, no gear, no fire ring, no trace that anyone had been there at all. Stevens stood in that clearing with his flashlight cutting through the dark and felt something he'd never felt before on a rescue. Unease. Deep, cold, unease. How does a camp just disappear? The search expanded at first light. 50 volunteers now. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras. The dogs worked in rotating shifts, trying to pick up any scent. They covered a 12-mile radius from Willow Creek. Every trail, every ridge, every valley within reasonable hiking distance. Days turned into a week. The weather held, clear and cold. Perfect conditions for searching. They found nothing. No abandoned gear. No campfire remains, no scraps of food or empty water bottles. 3 grown men don't just vanish into thin air, but that's exactly what the evidence suggested, or rather, the complete lack of evidence. On day 9, a volunteer found something, a broken branch about 8 feet up a pine tree 3 miles east of Willow Creek. The break was fresh. Could have been a man grabbing for support. Could have been an elk rubbing velvet off antlers. The search dogs showed no interest. Still, they gridded that area for 2 more days. Nothing. Mike's wife appeared on local news, her voice steady, her eyes hollow. They're experienced. They're careful. Something happened. Please keep looking. The community responded. Donations poured in. More volunteers arrived. The search pushed into week 3. Temperatures dropped. The first snow dusted the high peak. The window was closing. Stevens made the call on October 31st. 19 days of intensive searching. Over 200 volunteers. Thousands of man-hours. Zero evidence. He stood before the families and said the words nobody wanted to hear. "We're scaling back to recovery status." Recovery, not rescue. The distinction was brutal. It meant they were looking for bodies now, not survivors. Winter buried the Rockies under 8 feet of snow. The case stayed open technically, but active searching stopped. How could it not? There was nothing to search for. No leads, no clues, no direction. Just 3 men who walked into the mountains and disappeared as completely as if they'd never existed. The families hired private investigators. They offered rewards, $50,000 for information leading to anything. The story made national news for a brief cycle, then faded. Other missing persons cases took its place. Other families began their own nightmares. By spring 2017, the official stance was clear. Mike, Tom, and Derek had met with some unknown tragedy in the backcountry. Perhaps a fall into a hidden ravine. Perhaps a sudden medical emergency affecting all 3 simultaneously, unlikely as that seemed. Perhaps something else entirely. The Forest Service installed a memorial plaque at the trailhead in 2018. 3 names, 3 dates of birth, 1 date of disappearance. Hikers would stop, read it, take photos, and continue on their way. The mountains kept their secret, but secrets have a way of surfacing. Even after 7 years, even when everyone has stopped looking, even when the world has moved on. Sometimes it takes new eyes to see what's been hidden all along. In this case, those eyes weren't human. The Colorado Wildlife Conservation Program launched a new initiative in early 2023, high-resolution drones to survey elk populations, track migration patterns, and identify areas needing habitat restoration. The drones could cover terrain that would take human surveyors weeks to navigate. On March 14, 2023, a drone designated Unit 7 was mapping the Willow Creek watershed. The operator, a woman named Chen, sat in a warm office 70 miles away, watching live feed on dual monitors. She'd flown this route twice before. Dense forest, occasional clearings, nothing unusual. Just endless trees and the snake of Willow Creek cutting through it all. She was thinking about lunch when the drone's AI flagged something. An anomaly in grid section 47B. Chen zoomed in. The clearing. The same clearing where search teams had found nothing 7 years ago. Except now, there was something there. She adjusted the angle, dropped the drone lower. Her coffee went cold as she stared at the screen. A camp, complete and intact. 2 tents, still standing. A fire ring with rocks arranged in a careful circle. Gear scattered, but present. And something else, something that made Chen's hand freeze on the controls. Across the clearing, 30 yards from the tents, carved into the bark of a massive pine tree, were words. Even from the drone's camera, even through the distortion of distance and digital compression, the message was clear. Deep gouges in the wood, each letter 6 inches tall. We were watched. Chen saved the footage. She saved it 3 times on 3 different drives before she even moved from her chair. Then she picked up her phone and called the Summit County Sheriff's Office. When the dispatcher answered, Chen's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "I need to report a discovery," she said. "I think I found the missing hunters from 2016. And you need to see this." Within 4 hours, a forensic team was hiking toward Willow Creek. Stevens, the original search coordinator, came out of retirement to join them. He hadn't slept well since 2016. None of them had. The case that made no sense. The disappearance without a trace. Now, apparently, there was a trace. A camp that shouldn't exist. A message that shouldn't be there. They reached the clearing at dusk, same as 7 years before. This time it wasn't empty. The tent stood exactly as Chen's drone had shown. Green nylon, weathered but intact. The fire ring held old ashes, protected from wind by the surrounding stones. Sleeping bags visible through open tent flaps. Backpacks leaning against trees. A small propane stove. Cooking pot. Everything a hunting camp should have. Everything except the hunters. Stevens approached the pine tree slowly. The carved message loomed above him, each letter gouged deep into living wood. The bark around the words showed discoloration. Old damage, not fresh. This carving had been here for years. He touched one of the letters with his gloved hand. Rough edges, made with a knife probably, made with force, made with fear. We were watched. 4 words that changed everything. If they knew they were being watched, who was watching them? And more importantly, where were they now? The forensic team worked through the night under portable lights. They photographed everything. Every angle, every item, every shadow. They bagged and tagged gear, noting serial numbers, checking for blood or signs of struggle. They found Mike's satellite phone in his tent. Battery long dead. Tom's GPS unit lay in the dirt near the fire ring, screen cracked but potentially recoverable. Derek's journal sat open inside the second tent, pages warped by years of moisture but readable. That journal would answer some questions. It would also raise 100 more, but that discovery would come later, in the controlled environment of a forensics lab under bright fluorescent lights. For now, in this clearing lit by harsh portable lamps that cast deep shadows into the surrounding forest, the team worked with a growing sense that they weren't alone. Every technician felt it, that pressure of unseen eyes, that primitive instinct that says you're being watched. Stevens felt it strongest. He kept turning, scanning the tree line, seeing nothing but darkness between the pines. The forest was silent. No wind, no animals, no sounds except their own breathing and the click of cameras. At 2:47 a.m., one of the technicians called out. She'd been searching the perimeter, sweeping her flashlight in careful arcs. 35 yards from camp, directly across from the carved tree, she'd found something. A blind. A hunting blind, but not one that Mike, Tom, or Derek had built. Stevens joined her. The blind was sophisticated, camouflaged netting stretched between trees, a small platform, barely visible, constructed from local branches, a clear sightline directly into the camp. And on that platform, protected from weather by a plastic bag, was a camera, an old trail camera, the kind hunters use to photograph wildlife, the kind someone could use to photograph people. Stevens's hand trembled as he reached for it. The camera was off, memory card still inserted. Whatever was on that card had been waiting 7 years to be found. He looked back at the camp, then at the carved message on the tree, then down at the camera in his hands. Someone had been watching them. Mike, Tom, and Derek had known it. They'd carved that warning, but they'd never made it out to tell anyone, which meant whoever had been watching didn't just observe. They'd acted. The question was how, and why, and whether they were still out there, somewhere in these mountains, watching even now. Years of searching, and the mystery had only deepened. But at that very moment, holding that camera, Stevens knew they'd finally found the thread that would unravel everything. Whatever was on that memory card would change the case completely. He just had to be ready for what it revealed. The forensic lab in Denver smelled like coffee and antiseptic. Stevens hadn't left the building in 16 hours. The trail camera sat on a white table under bright examination lights, connected to a laptop by a tangle of cables. The tech working on it, a man named Rodriguez, had warned him. Memory cards degrade, 7 years exposed to temperature fluctuations, moisture, potential physical damage. We might get nothing. We might get fragments. Manage expectations. Stevens didn't care about expectations. He cared about answers. Rodriguez typed commands, ran diagnostic software, waited for progress bars to fill. Outside the lab windows, Denver went about its morning. People drove to work, bought coffee, complained about traffic. Normal life. Inside this room, 3 men who'd been missing for 7 years were about to speak from beyond whatever had taken them. The software beeped. Rodriguez leaned forward. Got something. Files are corrupted but recoverable. Looks like, Jesus, looks like over 300 photos. Timestamps run from October 12th through October 16th, 2016. 5 days. The entire span of when Mike, Tom, and Derek should have been in those mountains. Stevens felt his pulse in his temples. Show me. The first photo loaded. Timestamp. October 12, 2016, 3:42 p.m. The image showed the clearing from an elevated angle. The camp, freshly set up. 2 tents erected. Mike visible near the fire ring, arranging stones. Tom in the background, hanging a food bag from a tree branch. Derek unpacking gear from his backpack. A normal scene. 3 friends making camp. They had no idea they were being photographed. Rodriguez clicked to the next image. Same angle. 4 minutes later. Mike starting a fire. Tom and Derek sitting on logs, talking. You could see their mouths moving, captured mid-conversation. A conversation no one would ever hear. Rodriguez kept clicking. Photo after photo. Every 15 minutes, like clockwork. The trail camera's automatic timer had documented everything. Dinner preparation. The 3 men around the fire as darkness fell, their faces lit by flames, laughing at something. The last moment of normalcy. Stevens watched these frozen seconds and felt something twist in his chest. These men had no idea they were being hunted like the elk they'd come to find. The photos continued through the evening. 8:47 p.m. showed Mike and Derek still by the fire, Tom walking toward his tent. 9:02 p.m., all three visible, preparing for bed. 9:17 p.m., the camp empty except for the dying fire. The clearing dark except for a small glow from inside one tent. Someone reading by flashlight, probably. Then nothing. Hours of darkness captured in identical frames. The camp silent. The men sleeping. Until 1:33 a.m. Rodriguez stopped clicking. Stevens leaned closer to the screen. The image showed the clearing in infrared. The trail camera's night vision activated. Both tents closed. The dead fire ring. And there, at the edge of the frame, barely visible between two pine trees, a shape, human size, standing motionless, watching. "Go forward," Stevens said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Next photo. 1:48 a.m. The shape had moved. Closer now. Still in the shadows, but definitely human. Definitely watching. 2:03 a.m. Closer still. You could make out details now. A man, tall, wearing dark clothing. His face obscured by a hood or mask, standing 15 feet from the nearest tent, just standing there, watching them sleep. Rodriguez's hand hesitated over the mouse. "You sure you want to see this? Keep going." 2:18 a.m. The figure was right outside Tom's tent, crouched down, one hand extended toward the tent's zipper. 2:33 a.m. The tent was open, the figure inside. 2:48 a.m. The tent closed again. The figure back in the shadows. Stevens's mouth went dry. What had he done in those 15 minutes? What had happened inside that tent while Tom slept? The next photos showed the figure moving to the second tent. The same pattern. Approach, crouch, enter, wait, exit, return to shadows. By 3:48 a.m., the figure was gone, vanished back into the forest. The camp looked undisturbed. The men inside had no idea their sanctuary had been violated. Morning came in the photos. 6:12 a.m., light returning to the clearing. 6:27 a.m., Derek emerging from his tent, stretching. 6:42 a.m., all three men awake, moving around camp, making breakfast, checking gear, acting normal. But Stevens knew what they couldn't, that something had been inside their tents while they slept, that they'd been marked somehow, chosen. The day's photos showed a hunting trip. The men left camp at 7:15 a.m. heading northwest. The camera captured empty clearing shots every 15 minutes until 4:33 p.m. when they returned. They looked tired but content. Tom was smiling about something. They'd probably spotted elk, found good signs, felt confident about the next day's hunt. They had no idea this would be their last evening alive, or did they? Rodriguez clicked to a photo from 6:47 p.m. The three men sitting around the fire, but something was different. Their body language had changed. Mike was pointing toward the tree line. Tom was standing, tense. Derek had his hand near his belt, where a knife would be. The next photo showed all three men on their feet, facing the forest, facing the exact direction where the trail camera was hidden. "They knew," Stevens whispered. "They figured it out." 7:02 p.m. Mike was walking toward the camera's position, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping left and right, searching. 7:17 p.m. All three men spreading out, searching the perimeter. 7:32 p.m. Tom at the base of a tree, looking up, so close to the camera. Another 5 feet, and he would have found it. But he turned back, called to the others, moved on. The photos from that night showed the camp differently. The men didn't go to sleep. They sat by the fire, weapons close, hunting rifles across their laps, a hatchet within reach, waiting. They'd felt the eyes on them, sensed the wrongness, but they hadn't found the source, and by then, it was already too late. Rodriguez pulled up the October 14th photos. Morning. The camp was active, but different, urgent. The men were packing, not casually but frantically, shoving gear into bags, striking tents. They were leaving, abandoning the trip 2 days early. Smart move, the move that should have saved them. 8:47 a.m. showed the camp half dismantled. Then something happened. The next photo, 9:02 a.m., showed chaos. Both tents collapsed, gear scattered everywhere, and the three men, visible at the clearing's edge, running, not toward the trail that led out, toward the forest, deeper in, running from something the camera couldn't see. The following images captured an abandoned camp. Hours passed. No movement except wind stirring torn fabric. Then, at 2:15 p.m., the figure returned. Same dark clothing, same obscured face. But this time, he wasn't alone. 2 more shapes emerged from the trees. 3 figures total. They moved through the camp methodically, picking up items, examining them. One figure spent several minutes looking at Derek's journal, flipping through pages. Then they did something that made no sense. They put everything back. They re-erected the tents, arranged the gear, reconstructed the camp exactly as it had been. By 4:30 p.m., the clearing looked untouched, perfect, as if nothing had happened, as if 3 men hadn't fled in terror just hours before. The final photos were the most disturbing. October 16th, 10:23 a.m. One of the figures standing in the clearing center, looking directly at the camera. Looking at it, not near it, not past it, at it. He knew it was there, had always known. The next photo showed him walking toward the camera's position. Closer, closer, until his face filled the entire frame. A surgical mask covered his nose and mouth. Dark eyes stared through the lens. Cold eyes, empty eyes. And behind him, barely visible in the background, something that made Stevens's blood freeze. A shape on the ground near the fire ring, human-sized, motionless. A boot visible at one end. The sole caked with mud. Tom's boots, the same distinctive red laces he'd worn in the early photos. The photo after that was black. The camera had been turned off. Whoever had been watching didn't want to document what came next. Stevens pulled up the forensic report on Derek's journal while Rodriguez backed up the camera files. The journal was being preserved in an evidence locker, but they'd scanned every page. Most entries were mundane. Weather observations, elk sightings, inside jokes between the 3 friends. But the final entries, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, told a different story. October 13th. Something's off. Can't explain it. Just a feeling. Mike feels it too. Kept hearing sounds last night. Footsteps maybe? In the morning, found our food bag on the ground. Rope looked cut, not chewed. Tom says I'm paranoid. October 14th. Early entry. Not paranoid. We're being watched. I know it. We all know it. Found boot prints near camp this morning. Size 13, deep tread. None of us wear 13th. The prints circle the camp. Just circle it, like someone pacing, studying us. We're packing up, getting out today. October 14th. Later. They're here. Can't see them, but we hear them. In the trees. Multiple people. Maybe 3. They're hurting us. Every direction we try to go, we hear them there. Cutting us off. Pushing us deeper. Mike has his rifle. We're staying together. We're going to... The sentence ended. No period, no closing thought. Just stopped mid-word, the pen trailing off the page. The next page showed a single word, written in capital letters so hard the pen had torn through the paper. Run. After that, nothing. Blank pages. The journal had been in the tent when the figures reconstructed the camp. They'd put it back, left it open to that final page. A message? A taunt? Evidence of how completely they'd controlled the situation? Stevens stood and walked to the window. Denver's morning traffic crawled below. Normal life, continuing. Unaware that somewhere in the Colorado Rockies, 3 men had been hunted by people who'd planned every detail, who'd violated their camp while they slept, who'd watched them figure it out, who'd prevented their escape, who'd killed them, almost certainly, though the bodies still hadn't been found, who were organized enough to stage the scene, to make the camp look normal, to hide their crime for 7 years, and who'd been confident enough to stare directly into a camera, knowing their faces were being recorded and simply not caring. The carved message on the tree made sense now. We were watched. It wasn't carved by Mike, Tom, or Derek. They'd never made it back to camp. It was carved by the hunters, by whoever had orchestrated this. A signature, a boast. Look what we did. Look how completely we controlled them. We were watching, and they never had a chance. Rodriguez cleared his throat. There's something else. The GPS unit we recovered from Tom's pack, data recovery pulled its last recorded positions. He brought up a map on his screen. Red dots showed the GPS's movement. The trail from the parking area to Willow Creek. Normal. Then, on October 14th, the dots scattered. Northeast, away from the trail, deeper into unmapped forest. The dots formed an erratic pattern, doubling back, zigzagging, the route of people who were lost or fleeing. The final dot blinked on the screen, 7.3 miles from camp, in a section of forest so dense and remote that search teams had never reached it. That's where they ended up, Rodriguez said quietly. That's where we need to look. Stevens nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. The camp at Willow Creek had been a stage, a carefully preserved crime scene, but the actual crime had happened elsewhere, miles away, hidden in forest so thick you could vanish into it and never be found, unless someone knew exactly where to look. And now, finally, they did. The Summit County Sheriff authorized a new search party within hours. 12 officers, 6 forensic specialists, 3 K-9 units trained in human remains detection. They'd hike to the GPS's final coordinates. They'd grid search the area. They'd find what 7 years and careful concealment had hidden. Stevens would lead the team personally. He'd started this case. He'd finish it. But first, there was one more thing to check. The trail camera's metadata included information beyond the photos. Rodriguez pulled up the technical details, date stamps, file sizes, and something else, a detail that made Stevens's carefully maintained composure finally crack. The camera had been checked, not just planted and forgotten. Someone had returned to it during those 5 days, had downloaded the photos, had reviewed them, had watched the documentation of their own crime like someone reviewing footage of a sporting event. The camera's internal log showed a USB connection on October 15, 3:17 p.m. Whoever had done this had been proud enough to keep the evidence, confident enough that they'd never be caught. That confidence had held for 7 years, but confidence becomes arrogance, and arrogance makes mistakes. The trail camera had been left behind. The camp had been preserved too perfectly, and now that GPS coordinate glowed on the screen like a beacon. The hunters had been careful, methodical, patient, but they'd left a trail, faint, but there, and Stevens would follow it, no matter where it led. He looked at the final photo again, those cold eyes staring through the camera lens. Whoever you are, Stevens thought, we're coming, and this time, you're the one being watched. If you've ever felt eyes on you in the wilderness, you know that primal fear, that certainty that you're not alone. Mike, Tom, and Derek felt it. They tried to run, but what was waiting for them at those coordinates, 7 miles from camp? The hike to the coordinates took 6 hours. Dense forest gave way to denser forest, terrain that hadn't seen human footsteps in years, maybe decades. The kind of wilderness where sound gets swallowed by trees and distance becomes meaningless. Stevens led the team in single file, following the GPS dot that had waited 7 years to give up its secret. The dogs ranged ahead, trained noses working through layers of decomposed leaves and mountain soil. At 2:47 p.m. on March 23, 2023, the lead dog stopped. She sat, the signal for human remains. Her handler called out, and the team converged on a section of forest floor that looked like every other section they'd passed. Unremarkable, hidden, perfect. Stevens knelt and brushed away surface debris. His gloved hand touched fabric, weathered, rotted, but unmistakably human clothing. A jacket, dark green. He'd seen this jacket in the trail camera photos. Tom had been wearing it. The forensic team moved in with tools and careful hands. They worked slowly, documenting every detail, every layer. What they uncovered told the final chapter of a story that should never have been written. The first body was Tom, buried shallow, wrapped in his own sleeping bag. The sleeping bag they'd violated while he slept that first night. Poetic, in a sick way. His skull showed blunt force trauma, a single impact to the back of the head. Quick, efficient, brutal. The medical examiner would later confirm he'd died within seconds. No suffering, at least. Small mercy in a merciless situation. They found Mike 12 feet away. Same shallow burial, same sleeping bag shroud. But Mike's remains told a different story. His right hand showed defensive fractures, broken bones consistent with blocking a blow. His jaw was shattered. He'd fought back. He'd seen it coming and tried to stop it. The ME would find evidence of multiple impact. Mike hadn't died quickly. Mike had died hard. Derek was the last, 20 feet from the others. But Derek's burial was different, deeper, more carefully arranged, and wrapped with his body, pressed against his chest, was his journal, the same journal they'd found in the tent, except this was the real one, the original. What they'd found at camp was a plant, a decoy with staged final entries designed to control the narrative. This journal, the one buried with Derek, contained the truth. The forensic team extracted it with hands that trembled despite years of training. The pages were degraded but readable, and what they read made the entire investigation pivot on a single, horrifying axis. Derek's real final entry was dated October 14, 11:47 p.m. Written by firelight while Mike and Tom slept. Written after the men had decided to pack up and leave the next morning. The entry started normally enough. Observations about feeling watched, notes about strange sounds. Then, 3 paragraphs that changed everything. I know who's watching us. I figured it out this afternoon. That's why I can't sleep. That's why I'm writing this while they're both out. I need to document this before we leave tomorrow because if something happens, someone needs to know. The boot prints we found? I recognized the tread pattern. Mike's boots. Old ones he threw away 2 years ago. I watched him toss them in the donation bin at the trailhead. Someone took them. Someone who knew we'd come back here. Someone who knows us. The food bag that was cut? I checked the rope. That wasn't a knife cut. That was Mike's multi-tool. The exact pattern his blade makes. I know because I've watched him use it 100 times. Someone has Mike's old equipment. Someone is using it to make us think we're being stalked by strangers. But it's not strangers. It's someone who knows exactly what we'd recognize and what we wouldn't. I think I know why. 3 years ago, that hunting accident, the one we reported, the one we said we had nothing to do with, we lied. All 3 of us. We covered it up. We left that guy in the woods and drove away. We told each other it wasn't our fault, that he was trespassing on our spot, that he pulled his gun first. But we knew it was murder, not self-defense. And I think someone else knows too. I think someone's been planning this for 3 years. I think we're not being hunted. I think we're being executed. Stevens read the entry 3 times. Each time the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a random crime. This wasn't a wilderness mystery. This was premeditated revenge. Someone had waited 3 years, had learned their patterns, had collected their discarded equipment, had studied them so thoroughly that every detail was weaponized. The violation of their tents wasn't just intimidation. It was a message. I can reach you anywhere. I can touch you while you sleep. You're already dead. The trail camera wasn't hidden to spy. It was placed to document, to create a record of their fear, to show them figuring it out, to capture the moment they realized they were trapped. The photos weren't evidence of a crime. They were a trophy collection. And the staged camp at Willow Creek? That was the final insult, making it look like they'd simply vanished, denying them even the dignity of being known victims. The forensic team searched the burial site for 4 more hours. They found additional items, a small digital recorder wrapped in waterproof plastic buried between the bodies, a USB drive sealed in a metal case, and a hunting license, expired, belonging to a man named James Whitmore. Expired because James Whitmore had died 7 years ago, in October 2016, from a gunshot wound in these exact mountains. An accident that Mike, Tom, and Derek had reported finding. A tragedy they'd called in. A death they'd claimed no responsibility for. Stevens pulled the case file that night. James Whitmore, 34, solo hunter from Wyoming, found dead from a rifle shot to the chest on October 9, 2016, 3 days before Mike, Tom, and Derek started their trip. The investigation had been brief. Accidental discharge, likely self-inflicted. No witnesses, no evidence of foul play. Case closed. Whitmore was buried. His family grieved. His brother, his younger brother Marcus, had been noted in the file as being devastated, had requested to see the scene, had been denied due to ongoing investigation, had eventually accepted the official conclusion. Marcus Whitmore. Stevens typed the name into the database. Current address? Colorado Springs. Occupation? Wilderness guide. No criminal record. No red flags. Just a man who'd lost his brother and moved on with his life. Except he hadn't moved on. He'd moved closer. He'd gotten a job that put him in the mountains regularly, and he'd waited. The digital recorder contained audio files. The forensic tech played them in chronological order. The first recording was from October 13, 2016. Marcus Whitmore's voice, calm and measured, speaking like someone recording a video diary. Day 1 of justice. They're starting to feel it. The fear, the paranoia. Good. James felt that fear. When they shot him and left him bleeding. When they stood over him and decided to lie. When they drove away and let him die alone. Now they know how it feels. Subsequent recordings documented everything. Marcus describing his methodology, how he'd researched them for 3 years, how he'd joined online hunting forums under fake names to learn their patterns, how he'd collected their trash, their discarded gear, anything that would help him get inside their heads, how he'd recruited 2 friends, former military, to help with surveillance and logistics, how they'd practiced for months, rehearsed every contingency. The recordings from October 14th captured the endgame. Marcus's voice, excited now, describing how perfectly it was working, How Mike, Tom, and Derek were exactly where he wanted them. How they'd figured out they were being hunted, but not by whom or why. How they'd panicked and run deeper into the wilderness instead of toward help. How he'd herded them like animals to this remote location where no one would ever look. The final recording was after the execution. Marcus's voice quiet, satisfied. It's done. James is avenged. They died knowing why. I made sure of that. In the end, I told them about James, about their lie, about how I'd watched them lie to investigators and walk away free. Tom cried. Mike tried to bargain. Derek just accepted it, said he'd been waiting for this, said he knew it would catch up to them eventually. That's the one moment of honesty they gave, right at the end. I'm leaving the camp staged. Let them be a mystery. Let their families wonder. They denied James a proper ending. I'm denying them the same. The camera will stay. The evidence will stay buried here. And I'll go back to my life knowing that justice was served. The law failed James, but his brother didn't. Stevens sat in the evidence review room and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Not just anger, not just disgust, a deeper, more complicated emotion. Because part of him, a part he'd never admit in official reports, understood, not justified, never justified, but understood. Mike, Tom, and Derek had killed a man. They'd covered it up. They'd lied to investigators like him. They'd walked free while James Whitmore's family buried an empty truth. But understanding didn't change the job. Marcus Whitmore had committed triple homicide. Premeditated, methodical, brutal. He'd executed 3 men and hidden their bodies. He'd staged an elaborate crime scene. He'd evaded justice for 7 years, and he was still out there, living his normal life in Colorado Springs, confident that his secret was safe. Stevens coordinated with Colorado Springs PD. They arrested Marcus Whitmore at his home on March 24th at 6:15 a.m. He was drinking coffee on his porch when they arrived. He didn't run, didn't fight, just set down his mug and extended his hands for the cuffs. His only words, "What took you so long?" The trial was brief. Marcus pled guilty to all charges. His defense attorney tried to argue extenuating circumstances, crimes of passion driven by grief, and the failure of the justice system to properly investigate his brother's death. The prosecution countered with the evidence of planning, the 3-year timeline, the methodical execution. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. At sentencing, the families were allowed to speak. Mike's wife stood first. She talked about the 7 years of not knowing, the agony of uncertainty worse than grief because it never resolved. She looked at Marcus and said, "You didn't just kill him. You killed every day of my life since." Tom's mother spoke next, an elderly woman who'd aged a decade in those 7 years. She said simply, "My son made a terrible mistake. He should have paid for it in a court of law, not in the woods like an animal." Derek's father went last. He was the only one who acknowledged James Whitmore. "2 wrongs," he said. "2 terrible wrongs. My son helped kill your brother. You killed my son. And now both our families live in hell forever. There are no winners here, just ruins." Marcus Whitmore listened without expression. When asked if he had anything to say, he stood, looked at the families, looked at Stevens, looked at the judge. "I'd do it again," he said. "Every single part of it. They murdered James and walked away. Someone had to balance the scales. I'm not sorry. I'm satisfied. Send me away. I already did what I came to do." The judge sentenced him immediately. Marcus showed no reaction as they led him from the courtroom, just walked calmly, like a man who'd finished a long-planned task and could finally rest. Stevens returned to Willow Creek one final time before they closed the case. Spring had arrived in the Rockies. Wildflowers dotted the clearing where Mike, Tom, and Derek had made their last camp. The tents were gone now, collected as evidence. The carved message on the tree remained. "We were watched." Someone from the Forest Service had suggested cutting it out, removing the reminder. Stevens had refused. Let it stay. Let it be a warning. He stood in the clearing and thought about justice, the complicated, messy kind that doesn't fit in legal textbooks. Mike, Tom, and Derek had killed James Whitmore. That was murder. Marcus had killed them in return. That was also murder. The law was clear on both, but the morality? That was murkier. Revenge isn't justice, but when the justice system fails, what's left? Stevens didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure anyone did. The families received closure finally. Burial services were held. Mike, Tom, and Derek were laid to rest with their secrets exposed. The local news covered it extensively. The narrative shifted. They weren't tragic victims anymore. They were guilty men who'd faced vigilante justice. Public opinion split. Some said Marcus was a hero. Some said he was a monster. Most said both were true. Stevens retired 6 months after the case closed. He'd solved the mystery, found the missing hunters, brought their killer to justice. But solving it hadn't made him feel better. It had just shown him how thin the line between victim and perpetrator really was, how easily circumstances can turn people into monsters, how secrets buried in the wilderness don't stay buried forever. They fester, they grow, and eventually they surface in ways no one expects. The Willow Creek case became a training example at the FBI Academy, a lesson in persistence, in following evidence wherever it leads, in the importance of reviewing cold cases with new technology. But it was also a lesson in something darker, the inadequacy of initial investigations, the ease with which guilty people can walk away, the desperation that drives ordinary people to extraordinary violence. Cases like this weren't solved by brilliant detective work alone. They were solved by chance, by drone footage, by a trail camera left behind, by luck. And that was the part that haunted Stevens most. Without that drone, the clearing would still be empty, the bodies would still be hidden. Marcus would still be free. Mike's wife would still be wondering. 3 families would still be trapped in that terrible limbo of not knowing. The truth had surfaced, but only by accident. How many other truths remained buried in these mountains? How many other secrets waited in the dark? The carved message stayed on the tree for 2 more years before weather and time finally wore it away. But the clearing itself changed. Hikers avoided it. Locals called it cursed. The spot where 3 men disappeared and were found simultaneously, where guilt met vengeance, where nobody won. In 2025, the Forest Service officially closed the trail. Too many curiosity seekers, too many people looking for the infamous clearing, too many wanting to stand where evil had unfolded. The mountains reclaimed it. Pine needles covered the fire ring. Young trees grew where tents had stood. Nature erasing human stains like it always does eventually. But the story didn't fade. It couldn't, because it asked questions people didn't want to answer. What do you do when the justice system fails? How far is too far in seeking revenge? Where's the line between victim and villain? Mike, Tom, and Derek crossed that line when they killed James Whitmore. Marcus crossed it when he killed them in return. And somewhere in those crossings, justice itself got lost. 7 years Mike's wife had waited for him to come home. He never did. 7 years of searching. 7 years of hoping. And when the truth finally came, it wasn't the truth she'd hoped for. Her husband wasn't a victim of nature or accident. He was a perpetrator who'd become a victim of someone seeking the justice he'd denied another man. That's the cruelest part of the truth sometimes. It destroys the people we thought we knew. In the end, 5 families were destroyed. James Whitmore's family lost a son and brother. Mike, Tom, and Derek's families lost their loved ones and their illusions. Marcus Whitmore's family lost him too, first to obsession, then to prison. Nobody won, nobody healed. They all just learned to live in a world where the wilderness had taken more than it gave. The Rockies stand indifferent to all of it. Mountains don't judge. They don't remember. They just exist, vast and silent, holding secrets in their depths. How many other secrets? How many other disappearances with hidden truths? The wilderness keeps them all, patient and eternal, revealing nothing until chance or determination tears the veil away. Mike hugged his wife goodbye on October 12, 2016. He told her he'd be back in 5 days. He believed it, but he was carrying guilt into those mountains. Guilt he thought he'd left behind. Guilt that followed him like a shadow. And in the end, that guilt caught up to him in the form of a man who refused to let murder go unanswered. The truth about those 3 hunters wasn't a mystery. It was a mirror, reflecting back the violence we pretend doesn't exist until it explodes in ways we can't ignore. They went into the wilderness as guilty men pretending to be innocent. They never came back, and the mountains, as always, kept their secrets until someone cared enough to dig them up. Some mysteries end with answers. This one ended with questions about justice, about revenge, about the price we pay for the sins we try to bury, and about whether the wilderness ever truly lets us escape what we've done, or just gives us space to wait for consequences to find us. The trail is closed now. The clearing is gone, but the story remains. A reminder that we're always being watched, if not by people, then by our own conscience, and that no matter how deep we bury our secrets, the truth has a way of coming to the surface. even after 7 years, even when we think we've gotten away with it, even in the vast silence of the Colorado Rockies. The wilderness remembers everything.